want to start with the economy.
Sure.
What does the president need to do? What do we need to do? What does Congress need to do to get this economy going? That people are concerned about inflation, they're concerned about gas prices,
Yes.
groceries.
I think the fundamental place for the president to start is to make sure that we are again energy independent. He has to rebuild the XL pipeline, get that construction back underway, has to lift the limits on domestic energy exploration and production. I think if we're able to get fuel prices down, that's the driver on the economic side. It helps with everything. Farmers deal with higher fuel prices. The input prices for fertilizers are derived from fossil fuels. All those things can help bring down costs of food, of fuel, and help dampen the effects of inflation. So making sure they were energy independent, producing our own energy, that also gives us the ability to help out our friends around the world. Remember, now we get 8% of our energy from Russia. Unbelievable. We shouldn't be doing that, and we should be helping folks in Europe that are allies in NATO who are also relying on Russia for their energy, that provide resources to Russia to do the things we see them doing in Ukraine now. So that, I think, is fundamental to what we need to do to get inflation under control. As well as, I think, on the regulatory side, coming out of COVID-19, looking at what we can do to reduce some of the regulatory burden on businesses who deal with a tremendous number of issues with bringing workers back, with what they have to deal with in expanding their businesses or reopening their businesses. So lifting the regulatory burden from the government is another thing that can be a big help to our businesses.
Speaking of Russia,
Yeah.
how would you rate how the president is handling the war in Ukraine with Russia?
Well, listen, I think he's begun to do some of the right things. I wish he had done them earlier, because I do think there was at least the potential to have an impact. That being said, here's where we are today. We are finding ourselves in the middle of an unprovoked, barbaric attack against a fledgling democracy in Ukraine. By any measure, absolutely unacceptable, and needs the strongest pushback from everybody across the world, not just the United States. I still think there are more things the president needs to do. I think there are more sanctions that can be put in place economically. I think you make sure that all transactions, not just some in the banks of Russia, need to be sanctioned. I also think, too, that the SWIFT system needs to include all transactions, not just some. I think you need to also be able to attach the assets of every Russian oligarch, which they've started to do, as well as Vladimir Putin, as well as every Russian business person that has dollars outside of Russia. So I do think that there's more that we can do to be really aggressive, to have a significant impact on the Russian economy.
How do you think the president's doing with COVID response these days?
Yeah, listen, I think there's some things that he could have done much better. I think extending these mandates affecting businesses and their employees, and pushing businesses to get rid of employees who didn't get vaccinated. I think mask mandates were around much longer than what they needed to be, especially for our children. My wife's a school teacher, and I can tell you interactions with students with masks on has a detrimental impact on the development of a student. That, I think, is something that needed to happen much earlier. You know, it's very timely that all of a sudden they've lifted the mask mandate in Congress 2 days before the State of the Union address. So I understand the optics of that, but I would have wanted the president to be much more forward-thinking and to look at the impact that COVID-19 has had on our economy and do some things that would have focused on people at risk. I worked in public health for 28 years, so I think there was a different metric that the president should have used to really look at balancing the health effects of COVID, what the population needed to do to manage the disease. You're not going to get rid of the disease, but to manage it, and to make sure, too, that you're focusing on the population that's most at risk, because they're the folks that are going to be hospitalized, and they're the folks most likely to succumb from COVID-19. So make it a risk-based effort. And this administration did not put equal emphasis on therapeutics as well as testing in relation to personal protective equipment and vaccinations. So they've focused on those two, vaccinations and PPE. They should have, with equal emphasis, looked at therapeutics to treat the disease, to minimize the effects of the disease, and then testing. That too informs folks to make sure that they do the things necessary to contain the spread of disease.